Hello once again, and today we're going to talk about using the RDP protocol to connect to a server. So in the last video we discussed LXC, LXD containers and why they make better choices than virtual machines. In my Apache Guacamole presentation, we focused on using Guacamole as a secure shell portal to self-hosted server instances. Linux server instances are lean and normally don't require a graphical user interface desktop, and most people would consider it kind of blasphemy to add one. However, hey, it's fun, so we're going to do it. Did you know we can add a desktop to a LXC LXD server instance? Apache Guacamole can connect to a desktop interface. In the Guacamole presentation, we were connecting to secure shell consoles for the most part. And so I wanted to show that we can connect to a desktop interface as well. So why RDP instead of VNC? And RDP and VNC are probably the two top protocols in existence today for making connection to a graphical user interface over the net. So virtual network computing, VNC, is a cross-platform screen sharing system originally designed for remote control and remote assistance. RDP is proprietary to Microsoft, although there are RDP servers for many platforms, including Linux, as you're going to see in this presentation. VNC is more of a screen sharing program, whereas RDP actually logs into the remote computer, creating a dedicated session. And VNC exchanges pixel-based images over the network, whereas RDP is more tightly integrated with the operating system screen services, and that makes RDP faster as well. So, VNC and also NX, the protocol used by another popular program called No Machine, are more for screen sharing and remote assistance, and we really want a remote connection. We want RDP because it creates more of a true virtual desktop interface. And programs like Chrome Remote Desktop and TeamViewer are already popular for remote desktop sharing and assistance over the internet. Apache Guacamole supports both RDP and VNC to connect to systems. So we're going to add a desktop to a LXC LXD image, which is normally just a server and does not have any sort of a desktop GUI. We will give that LXC LXD image an RDP server, and we're going to use Apache Guacamole to connect to that desktop through the RDP protocol. Okay, so I'm here in my host machine, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the virtual machine that we used for the LXC LXD demonstration. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to SSH into Scott at 172.16.15.15, provide my password, and we're signed into that VM over there. That is the test machine at 172.16.15.15. Clear the screen off. I'm going to do an LXC list. And I have two machines running. One of them is on the internal LXC network at 10.241.22.178. And one is exposed to my main network at 172.16.1.209. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say LXC exec Scott -LXD 2, and then bring up the BOSH shell. And so it is connected to root over there. And what I'm now going to do is to go get a script that I learned about that does everything you need to do for Ubuntu server in order to install it, the desktop interface with RDP. But I first have to install the Ubuntu desktop. So I'm going to do sudo apt install. I don't have to do sudo because I'm in root. So do an apt install Ubuntu desktop. And I'll say yes, go do that. So Ubuntu desktop has lots and lots of pieces, and this is going to go on probably forever until we actually get it installed. This is one of the reasons why you don't want to install a desktop like we're doing on a server, because if you want the server to be leaner and more efficient, you don't want to have it running all the desktop software infrastructure. But we're doing this as a demo, and there are some instances where you might want to be able to run a desktop interface, especially in the use case where what you're trying to create is a virtual desktop infrastructure, VDI. And that's where you provide a system that's network-based that remote users can connect to and get a full desktop experience. So in essence, what we're doing is we're reproducing a network-based Ubuntu desktop computer that people can connect to from anywhere in the world. So being able to connect to it from anywhere is being done by using Guacamole, Apache Guacamole, as we demonstrated in the Guacamole video, except there we were only using Guacamole to make connections to SSH sessions. Over here, we're going to be using it to connect to an actual full graphical desktop interface. And that's the interface we're installing right now. So let's see. Due to the magic of computing, we will be back when this is over. Okay, now that the Ubuntu desktop is installed, we need to install the script that was written by a Belgium company, consulting firm over there. And in order to do that, we are going to first of all sign on as the user Scott, and we can do that because we created the user Scott, which is in the last installation, the last video. And so now I'm signed on to Scott with the su-scott. And now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and download the script. And we've got a copy of the script. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unzip the installer out of the script. I suppose they put it in a zip file because they wanted to make sure of its integrity. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and run the script. So it's going to go ahead and figure out what version of RDP is here. It's going ahead and detecting which X server org core package is installed. That's the X Windows version. And then it's going to ask for the sudo password. You can't run this thing as sudo initially, but it does ask for the sudo password later on. And now it's going to go off and do the installation of the XRDP components, which, by the way, if you've ever tried to install XRDP on Ubuntu, it's very easy to install. It's another thing to get it working all the way through the login, and that's kind of what the script does. It adds all the bits that are required to make it work all the way through to the login. So anyway, this is going to take a little while, so we will be back after this completes. Okay, so now the installation of the RDP server has completed. And before that, we completed the desktop installation. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to do an if config, remind ourselves the address, and it's 172.16.1.209. I'm going to go up here to my Heimdall menu on my network, and I'm going to launch my version of Guacamole. And in Guacamole, I'm going to log in using Bitwarden, which is another product which is highly advisable. And then I am going to, Bitwarden requires 2FA authentication. I'm going to put my 2FA key in here, and I'm logging into Bitwarden. So what I'm going to do is with my Guacamole video, it described how you can create a new profile. So I just went over to settings, and now I'm going to go over to connections, and now I'm going to go ahead and add a new connections into a group that I have called GUIs. So I'm going to click on new connection inside that group. I'm going to call this thing Scott Test, just because that's what I'm going to name it. It's going to be in GUIs. Instead of VNC, I'm going to say it's RDP. And then I'm going to say the host name is the IP address. So remember here that the IP address is 172.16.1.209. So we go back up here to 172.16.1.209. And then RDP uses port 3389. And then I'm going to put in my username for the Scott account, and I'm going to put in my password. Now, I'm going to go down here further, and I am going to say it has other authentication things. I'm looking for what those are. Oh yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and say ignore server certificate, because this is kind of an important part of this. And that should be probably all that I need in my definition. So now I'm going to go ahead and do a save. And I'll go into my GUIs. And I'll go ahead and try to connect to Scott Test by, whoops, wait a second. We've got to go back home because we're in the settings screen. Go into GUIs. And now we click on Scott Test. Notice instead of the LXC prompt that or the SSH prompt that we had on the other terminals, which looks like this little greater than and underscore prompt, we have here instead something that looks like a terminal to indicate a full screen GUI. So I'm clicking on Scott Test, and it says it's connecting. Hopefully this will work. Okay, it turned out I didn't have to wait very long because it's already up and running. I could have left the recording running, but here's the Ubuntu Desktop. It's running inside of an HTML5 window via Guacamole, and there we are. So it says you want to set up live patch and doing all the types of things that we would normally do in setting up Ubuntu from scratch. I recognize the server was out there before, but the thing is when you create a desktop, it's going to ask you some additional questions. So just for fun, we'll come over here and we'll do well, first of all, it might be interesting to launch a terminal. So we'll go ahead and bring up a terminal inside of this new desktop, which is now running inside of a LXC instance. And we do an if config, and we verify that it is in fact running at 172.16.1.209. And there it is. And then, of course, it's saying it needs to restart in order to load updates, and there are updates to the desktop, basically. I'm just going to minimize this for right now because we don't really need that to happen. Okay, don't minimize. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on Settings. Bring up the settings screen. As I said, this thing is kind of resource starved. Normally, I would have given it a lot more memory if I had thought about the fact that I was going to create a desktop. Keep in mind, the virtual machine has 2 gigs of memory, and then the container is using memory below that or out of that part. So Ubuntu is running really leanly and meanly. We are, if we do an about, we'll see that it claims that it's got 3.8 gigs of memory. That's actually the total memory that the VM has, because the VM was given 4 gigs. I said it was 2 gigs. I guess I gave it 4 gigs. And so it's carving its resources out of that. But the point in all of this is that I have this machine that's accessible. And by the way, I have this going through NginX Reverse Proxy Manager, so you can see that the connection for my Guacamole is secure. So yeah, I could connect to this Guacamole with my username, my password, and my 2FA key, and I could access this this instance for this virtual container anywhere in the world. And so consequently, there we go. That was our mission. We have accomplished it all. So I can turn around and say restart now. Let's just see how quickly this goes. It wants my sudo password because it's going to install things. This is a pop-up that we got from Guacamole. And so I can say, yeah, go home. And you can see in recent connections here, it has Scott test, which is that container that we added the GUI to and we added the RDP to. And we're now waiting for that container to reboot and install all of its updates. And that's one really interesting fact that, you know, containers, yeah, you can do sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade in containers. But here you go. This is not a virtual machine. This is actually a LXC container. And I could have had 3 or 4 LXC containers on this, and I could have added GUIs to them. So we'll see if that was a long enough time to reboot. I suspect it's not, but we'll click on it and see if we can get there. And now it says connected to Guacamole, waiting for response. Since we're still waiting, I think that it is probably not fully rebooted yet, but we'll wait around and see what happens. Connection error. Yeah, connection error means, hey, the machine you're trying to connect to, I can't connect to it yet. It's not fully booted, and so that makes a difference. If I come down here, you can see that we're back at the VM, which is Ubuntu test. If I LXC over to Scott-LXD2, which is what we added the desktop to, which I called Scott test over there in Guacamole, it's now where I can log into it at least. Okay. So now we're going to go back up here to Guacamole, and we're going to try to click on it again. It says connected to Guacamole. So just because the server booted up might not mean the whole GUI's up, but this is a good sign because the Guacamole overlay went away. And there you go, we're signed in. So now we have a fully running Ubuntu desktop here that's running inside of a LXC container. So I know we did quite a bit today. We connected to a LXC LXD container console, which started basically as a command prompt, which is where we ended the last video. We added a desktop GUI interface to this server instance. So keep in mind, servers don't normally have a desktop interface, and we added a desktop interface to this server Ubuntu. We also added an RDP server to that server instance using Microsoft's Remote Desktop Protocol. And we created an Apache Guacamole profile to sign into the desktop interface via RDP. So now our full-up GUI interface, which is network accessible, is actually an interface that is completely running out of an LXC LXD container. And that's pretty impressive, pretty powerful, and pretty low resource. Anyway, if you made it this far through the video, thank you so much. And please subscribe and like, and we'll see you on down the road the next time.